Very well. So, in order to understand how to move things around here inside of Maya, we need to use the three most commonly things, which is selection, movement, rotation, and scale. In order to select something inside of Maya, we're going to press the letter Q. Q is our selection mode, as you can see right here, and it allows us to select whatever thing we have on the viewport. We select by just clicking on top of an object, and this, as you can see, highlights the object and allows us to access something called its channel box, which are the information that tells us where this object is on the world. As you can see, every object in the 3D world will have something called translation, rotation, and scale, which is where the object is, how it's rotated, and what's the scale of the object. By default, this object is 0 and 1 on translation, rotation, and on scale. So Q is the basic selection mode. If you click outside of the object gets deselected. We can also do a selection, like a selection box. So if you have multiple objects, let me show you real quick here. Whoop. We have multiple objects and we select all of them, the last selected object will be highlighted green, while all of the other ones will be selected with a white color. So you can see the last one that we select is going to be the green one. To add an object to a selection, you can click on an object, press a shift, and then select other objects. And this will also add to the selections. But we'll talk about multiple objects in just a second. So selection is the basic way in which we get access to the transformations of an object. Once we're inside the transformations, we can select what kind of change or what kind of modification we want to do. And the first one is W, which is movement. As you can see, we're going to get this thing called a gizmo. A gizmo is just three arrows that we're seeing that allows us to know where the axis of the object are pointing. So the red axis, as we mentioned before, is the X axis. The green axis is the yellow, or the, sorry, not the yellow, the Y axis. And the blue axis is the Z axis. So by accessing this axis, we can move the object in that specific direction. So for instance, if we want to move this sphere to the right, we just push this with the red arrow. And as you can see, the translation tells us, hey, this object is now 9.4 units away from the center of the grid. If we push this up, it's going to say, hey, this object is now 9.1 units away from the grid. Every unit that we see here in Maya, by the way, it's centimeters. Centimeters are the default units for Maya. And if we push this forward, as you can see, it's 15.7 units forward in the grid. At any point, I can select all of the elements right here, all of the units, and press a 0 to bring this element back to its origin, right there. Once we have this, we can move it again, or we can use any of the other tools. Now, as you can see, there's a couple of extra buttons in this gizmo. The first buttons that I want to talk about are these little floating squares. These are squares that allows us to move the object in two axes while blocking the third one. Why is this useful? Well, imagine this sphere is here on top of the ground, and I want to move this sphere somewhere around here, but I'm not exactly sure. I don't want to be like second guessing myself and just like pushing and pulling this guys right here to move it on the X and Z axis. I would like to be able to explore the position and make sure that this thing will not be moved on the Y axis. So if I select the little square right there, I can actually move it on the X and Z axis without moving it on the Y axis. So I'm only moving it on two axes, and I can be sure that this thing will not be going under or over the floor. So once I'm happy and I'm like, yeah, about there sounds right, there you go. The sphere is right on that point, and I can either save this information or just know that the element is where I want it to be. It's very handy. For instance, imagine we're doing like a room and we have like a frame with a photograph. We can use this one to move it along the wall and make sure that it doesn't leave the wall, but we can just like position it where we want it on the wall. So this little square is very handy to, again, block one of the axes. There's another one, which is this one right here, but this one's a little bit more tricky, and I'm actually going to be using a box to show you this. Let's imagine that I push this box to one of the corners right around there. Push this up, and there we go. So that box is on that on the grid's corner. If I select the center line right here, you can see I'm moving all of the three axes at the same time, and I can move it to like the back corner right there. It might seem like the cube is on the back corner, but if I rotate the camera, you're gonna realize that the cube is actually floating in the like middle of whatever of this grid, right? And the problem is this cube allows us to do something called a free movement, but it's more like a camera-based movement. So the camera becomes a flat plane, and depending on where we place it on the camera's like plane, we're gonna have it right there, but it might not be exactly where we want it. So on my as a personal recommendation on this first chapters, I strongly recommend against using that movement right there. It is quite useful for more like organic movements, but for now, try to just move with the little elements right here, the little arrows, or with these little squares if you already know that you're on the plane that you want. If at any point you move the object and you want to bring it back to the origin, again, just zero out at the translations on the channel box of your object, which you can find right here. Sometimes this thing is hidden. Just click on this one and you should be accessing the channel box. Another thing, if you at any point get lost on the viewport, you don't know where the viewport is, don't worry, press F and F will frame the object. It's just a matter of like moving our cube so that it's again back to like to the beginning, and you should be good to go. So F will frame the scene and it will get you back to the center of our little world right here. One final little piece of advice, just the final little thing here with the move brush, or the well, not the move brush, the move tool. There's a shortcut which is Alt and B. If you do Alt B, you're gonna change the color of the background. Sometimes people have a little bit of an issue with the like basic gray background. I personally like this one, but if you like, this is another one of the default ones, the blue background. It's mainly for display purposes. It doesn't change anything on the renders or anything. It's just to see the shapes in a better way. Now, if we jump to the letter E, we're going to go into the rotation tool, which allows us, as the name implies, to rotate the object, as you can see right here. I'm just going to reset this real quick. There we go. I'll explain that in just a second. So by rotating the object, we can rotate this on different axes, such as the Y-axis, the Z-axis, and the X-axis. Okay, we can also click in between the axes and do free rotation, which, similar to the movement tool, it's not a bad idea, but it might give you a slightly different, problems. At any point, we can also zero out the rotations of the object, and we're going to be back to 0. If you click on the outer ring, you're going to be able to rotate the object in a camera-based movement as well. So if you're in like a side view like this, it's kind of like doing a side rotation. But you can see all of the numbers also go a little bit crazy here on the rotation. So similar to the movement tool, I don't recommend using the free rotation or this one just yet. We will be using it, but a little bit later. Finally, we have R, which is the scale tool. This is the final of the tools. Again, we've mentioned this is movement. This is selection, movement, rotation, and scale. With scale, we can scale or change the size of our object on the X-axis, on the Y-axis, and on the Z-axis. It might look like we're extruding the object, but we're actually not. We're actually deforming the object. It looks a little bit more obvious with the sphere, where the form of the sphere gets completely distorted. So by using the scale tool, as you can see, we can do it. We can also constrain it to only 2 axes, which can be very handy as well. Or in this particular case, I do prefer using quite a bit the uniform scale, which is right there on the center of the object. You can manually input any number over here, say 5, and the whole object is going to be